Good afternoon and good evening for those of you in India. My name is Dhruva Jaishankar and I'm Executive Director of ORF America. The past few days have seen a spike in India-Pakistan tensions and a raft of contradicting claims and disinformation. This program over the next hour is meant to provide some clarity and context to the events of the past few days and will be broadcast publicly. For background, for those of you who do not follow the region so carefully, on April 22nd, 25 Indian civilians and one Nepali were killed in a terrorist attack in the Indian Union Territory of Jammu and Kashmir. India named the Resistance Front, or TRF, a cover for the Pakistan-based Lashkar-e-Taiba, which initially claimed the attack as the responsible party. India also assessed a direct Pakistani role in the attack based on communication notes, eyewitness accounts, social media propaganda, TRF's protection by Pakistan and the United Nations, and intelligence on future attacks that were being planned. In response, India suspended the Indus Waters Treaty, a treaty that had been in force since 1960, and took a further set of diplomatic measures. On May 7th, a few days ago, India launched Operation Sindoor, involving missile strikes from aircraft operating in Indian airspace on terrorist camps. 5 of these were in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, and 4 were in Pakistan proper. These included Bahawalpur, which is headquarters of Jaish-e-Mohammed, and Muridke, the headquarters of Lashkar-e-Taiba. New Delhi provided a rationale for each target, shared video footage on some strikes, and emphasized that no Pakistani military establishments were targeted. Pakistan has claimed that Indian aircraft were shot down, and despite some initial reports of debris, there's been no confirmation yet by India. Over the next 3 days, Pakistan responded with heavy, high-caliber firing on the line of control, which resulted in at least 16 civilian deaths and several military deaths. India responded in kind with heavy artillery. In addition, Pakistan launched large numbers of drones at several sites, including hundreds of mostly Turkish-manufactured drones. India retaliated with drone strikes against at least 4 military sites in Pakistan. India also accused Pakistan of using civilian airliners as a shield by not closing its airspace. On May 9th, the International Monetary Fund freed $1 billion for Pakistan and approved a new $1.4 billion program. The next few days saw a significant escalation, with Pakistan using drones, loitering munitions, and aircraft against a very large number of civilian and military sites in India. India responded with large-scale air launch precision strikes on at least 8 Pakistani military targets, hitting weapon storage, command and control, and radar sites. This prompted a call from Pakistan's Director General of Military Operations, or DGMO, to his Indian counterpart, and the two sides agreed to stop firing on land, air, and sea. While both sides had been in touch with American, British, Saudi, Emirati, and EU officials, the US was quick to claim credit for this ceasefire. India, for its part, has not used the term and has insisted that Operation Sindoor is still underway, a point underscored by the Prime Minister Modi's recent remarks. Within hours, however, of this understanding, Pakistan appeared to violate this agreement with drones sighted in Srinagar, Punjab, and Rajasthan. To discuss and contextualize these developments, we have 3 excellent speakers with us. First, Lieutenant General Syed Hasnain, retired from the Indian Army. He's a former commander who served for many years in Jammu and Kashmir. Second, we have Dr. Aparna Pande, who is a director of the Initiative on the Future of India and South Asia at the Hudson Institute in Washington, D.C. She's the author of several books, including Explaining Pakistan's Foreign Policy, which was also the subject of her doctoral dissertation. And third, we have Ashok Malik, who is partner at the Asia Group and was previously policy advisor and additional secretary in India's Ministry of External Affairs. First, Aparna, could you please provide us a little bit of background on terrorism as a factor in recent years in India-Pakistan relations?
Good afternoon and good morning, I think, for Mr. Malik, way out where he is. I would like to start by thanking Dhruv and ORF America for inviting me to speak here. Wonderful to be on a panel with the General and Ashok. 9/11 may have brought threats of terrorism and nuclear proliferation front and center globally, but in South Asia, it actually simply reinforced concerns India has had for decades. Pakistan's use of unconventional warfare or militias and terror groups for political ends, which dates back to the partition and independence of both countries. Terror attacks inside India date back to 1989, when after the end of the anti-Soviet Afghan jihad, many of the Mujahideen who remained in the region, instead of returning to their countries, turned their focus to India and Kashmir. They were helped in this and supported by the Pakistani military intelligence apparatus. Since 1998, sort of what has happened is actually what you can call unconventional warfare under a nuclear umbrella, once the two countries turned nuclear. So for the last 26 years, we witness a cycle on repeat. A terror attack, followed by escalation in tensions, saber rattling. This results in the global community applying pressure on both countries to back down. Prior to 2015, this would result in a high-profile meeting of the leaders and a talk of resuming discussions. However, while that hasn't happened for the last 10 years, this temporary quiet only lasts till the next terror attack, and then the cycle is repeated once again. Over the last 35 years, India has faced terror attacks in all its major cities. It also has faced sort of terror attacks which have gained public attention, like the 1992 Mumbai terror attacks, 2001 attack on the Indian Parliament, 2008 Mumbai terror attack, the 2016 Uri and Pathankot, 2019 Pulwama, and then 2025 Pahalgam. Indian security establishment is confident that almost all these attacks can be traced back either to Pakistan-based groups or groups aligned with them in Pakistan and very often inside India as well. Most international observers agree that at periodic intervals, Pakistani leaders, civilian and military, have acknowledged support for these terror proxies against India and even against Afghanistan. The rationale for that is that since independence in 1947, Pakistan's foreign and security policy has been driven by this desire to check what Pakistan sees as hegemonic India. Unable to maintain parity with India on the conventional military front, asymmetrical warfare or terrorism is viewed as the only option or a cost-friendly option and a potent alternative against a much larger neighbor. The Kashmir conflict is viewed as the unfinished business. And the reason I cite it is that 6 days before the Pahalgam terror attacks, Pakistan's army chief in a public speech referred to the conflict between India and Pakistan as between Hindus and Muslims. He cited the two-nation theory, and he expressed support for Kashmir. So for the last 7 decades, Pakistan has nurtured a hardline, what you can call Kashmir Bazor Shamshir, or Kashmir by the sword lobby, that portrays India as an existential threat. And this is a view supported by the military, but also by other actors inside Pakistani society. Historically, India's response used to be sporadic engagement. But for the last and between 47 and 2015, I believe, Indian and Pakistani leaders met 45 times. But since 2015, that has changed. India's original hope used to be that comprehensive dialogue would build a mechanism to resolve issues, but the rise in terrorism has made it very difficult for any Indian government to consider a dialogue unless action is taken on terrorism. I'll stop there. Look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. To General Saab, please, as somebody who's served for many times and for many years in Jammu and Kashmir, maybe talk through what actually happened at Pahalgam, how significant it was, and what it means for Jammu and Kashmir.
Thank you, Dhruva. Thank you, first of all, for inviting me for this very, very high-profile seminar, may I say. And it's a pleasure. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. I'll start from 2015, perhaps. That may be a good context to start with. Prime Minister Modi made serious efforts to try and reach out, ending up even with his dash to Lahore to speak to then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. But somehow, everything seemed to have been spurned by Pakistan at that time. And you had the return terrorist attack which took place in Pathankot. That was followed up by the Uri attack in 2016, immediately followed up by the surgical strikes, the first response from India's side to a particular terrorist act sponsored by Pakistan. Those were small strikes comparatively in 5 places. Thereafter came 2019, when you had a rather larger, high-profile action at Pulwama, in which 40 policemen of the CRPF were killed in a IED attack. The response immediately was 10, 12 days later, the Indian Air Force struck Balakot. And that was in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, outside the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir territory, and a large number of terrorists were killed in that. 2019 became a very important year because that was the year that finally India decided to abrogate Article 370, which gave a special status to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. They brought it down to the status of a union territory and virtually took on the administration centrally. Now, ever since then, a serious effort at integration of Jammu and Kashmir has gone on, and a very serious counter-terrorism effort has simultaneously gone on, resulting in far better integration of the Kashmiri people with the rest of India, taking down neutralization of a large number of networks that were sponsored by Pakistan, including financial networks, drug networks, media networks, and things of that nature. As normalcy returned in Jammu and Kashmir between 2019 and 2025, what became evident was the fast receding relevance of Pakistan to the entire narrative. And for Pakistan, it was important to regain some of that relevance in the eyes of the Kashmiri people. That is why from 2023 in particular, after the COVID interlude, you have found a series of efforts going on to regain the narrative in their own favor. Most of this terrorist activity sponsored by Pakistan has been undertaken south of the Pir Panjal range, which divides the state of Jammu and Kashmir into two halves. The northern half is the valley itself, the Kashmir Valley, which is Muslim predominant, and the southern portion is relatively more equitably, distributed in terms of religious affinity between Hindus and Muslims. Now, most of these attacks have taken place in the Jammu region. Against the run of play, what happened on the 22nd of April was, against the run of play, a high-profile terror act taking place in a place called Pahalgam, which is very close to the Pir Panjal range, on the junction of the Pir Panjal and the Kishtwar range. This was a follow-up to the terrible speech given by General Asim Munir, recalling the entire concept of the two-nation theory, etc., which led us to believe and link this particular speech with this dastardly attack, which was claimed by an organization called the Resistance Front, which is essentially an euphemism for the Lashkar-e-Toiba. Now, 26 people dead, and that too with the religious profiling, gender profiling in an area which is a high-profile tourist spot. It's important for me to end this intervention by saying this has been a particularly very, very good tourist season in Jammu and Kashmir. 800,000 people have visited the Tulip Gardens in Srinagar. And if this kind of a narrative of an improving economy, tourist economy, etc., had continued, Pakistan's narrative, Pakistan's relevance would have fast receded. To regain that, a terrorist action of this kind has been carried out, to which obviously India could not have just sat on its haunches. It has responded, and responded effectively.
Thank you, General. And actually, that leads me to my next question to you. In terms of the response, and perhaps maybe starting with the response on May 7th, Operation Sindoor being launched, maybe give a sense of why India launched those operations and why those targets in particular.
See, Dhruva, what has happened is that in the recent past, over the last 10, 12 years, ever since the government of Prime Minister Modi has come, the BJP government, it has been decided that we will respond to every major terror act, something which is Pakistan is attempting to convey a message to the people in Kashmir. If you recall, 2008, we did not respond to the 26/11 Mumbai attack, which led to 165 deaths. We did not respond to various other terror acts again, except that in 2016, with the Uri attacks, when 20 soldiers were killed in the border town of Uri, we responded with the surgical strikes, which were not a deterrence operation. These were primarily an operation for strategic messaging to say we had the intent, the clarity, the political aim to be able to carry it out. Thereafter, 2000, there was an interlude. We carried out some very strong operations. 2019, we responded with Balakot. So we've had a history of response. But this time, it was clear that response could not be restricted to this Jammu state or the areas of Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. What we needed to target was the center of gravity of this entire effort which has gone on, the terrorist effort, sponsored proxy war which has gone on. The center of gravity lies in Pakistan, Punjab, which is also its granary. And so the decision-making started with this Cabinet Committee for Security convening and some important diplomatic decisions being taken. One of the most important decisions here in the diplomatic economic domain was the suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, which has been in place since 1960. Now, this, I think, first of all, Pakistan, it must be remembered that Pakistan is a water-deficient country, and this was a very, very major decision which the government of India has taken. Thereafter, the government of India gave itself a 10, 12, 14-day interlude in which it carried out its confirmatory reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, etc., built up its deception plan, and finally launched the strikes. The strikes at 9 locations, 4 of them, as you have just explained, in Punjab. That's what has the major importance. Muridke, that's the headquarters of the Lashkar-e-Toiba. Bahawalpur, the headquarters of the Jaish-e-Mohammed, and places like Sialkot, which are known to have been the launch pads for the terror strike on Pathankot, for example, in 2016. This was a very important, strong message to be sent that India had the political will to strike where it mattered. And that was the primarily intention. The political aim, to my mind, the way I assess it, of course, no one knows the political aim upfront otherwise. The way I assess it was to assert a zero tolerance for terror and nuclear blackmail, because it must be remembered that all this was coming up under the overhang of the nuclear threat. The military aim, to put it very, very simply, was a willingness to showcase deep strikes against terrorist infrastructure and alter the global narrative on Kashmir. Also to demonstrate our resolve against state-sponsored terror. And lastly, to demonstrate India's technological superiority. I think in 3 days, what has been achieved is 11 years of efforts of Prime Minister Modi to put together the complete doctrine and structures to target and neutralize the terrorist infrastructure inside Pakistan itself. And very importantly, to demonstrate our political will to strike and strike again if necessary. I'll stop there.
Thank you, General. I should remind listeners that they can type questions into the chat. My colleagues will curate some of those questions and send them to me, and I will pose them to our panelists based on the amount of time we have left. If I can now turn to Ashok Malik. You've worked in as a journalist, as a diplomat in the Ministry of External Affairs, also now as a consultant in the private sector. But I want to ask you about a few things. One, give us a sense of what followed the initial round of attacks, particularly the diplomatic efforts, and what was the role of the United States and other actors? What was helpful? What was less helpful? You're on mute.
On mute. Thank you, Dhruva, for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here with General Hasnain and Aparna. Dhruva, before I go into the diplomacy of the immediate episode, I think there's a certain context that needs to be explained. This is not the first terror attack India has faced, as Aparna has pointed out and as the general has pointed out, that we've been having these attacks for a number of years. And if you look at this century, it begins with 2001, the attack on Indian Parliament, and then 2008 and so on. Now, there was a sense, there was very limited diplomatic space for India to act, because the sense that Pakistan has succeeded in conveying was that even the slightest response from India would trigger an almost immediate nuclear incident. So it was felt that India was hamstrung, and India's diplomatic interlocutors often urged it to respond in other ways, with coercive diplomacy, with economic sanctions, but not take military steps, because they were concerned, almost paranoid, or had been made paranoid by the Pakistanis, that there was no alternative to a nuclear incident. Now, India's military planners, India's government, India's strategists have long believed that there is a vast spectrum between no action at all and a complete, total nuclear conflict. There's a vast spectrum which has not been explored sufficiently for many reasons, domestic reasons as well, but also because the diplomatic space was not there. The big change with Prime Minister Modi coming in 2014, and especially after 2016, after the Uri attack, was that space under the nuclear umbrella began to be explored. So it begins with surgical strikes in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, which is essentially a very shallow incursion from one neighborhood of Kashmir to another, if you know what I mean. Then in 2019, it moves to Balakot, which is in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. It's in a frontier province, and it's seen as another threshold being crossed. This year, or this month, on May 7th, you saw strikes, as we pointed out, in the heartland of Pakistani Punjab, which is so central to not just Pakistani identity, but it's so central to the army itself and the army's generals, its recruitment patterns, its soldiers. What is interesting is, immediately after the Pahalgam attack of April 22nd, India's diplomatic interlocutors almost expected that India would respond. This is so unlike, say, 2001 or 2008, when they would have jumped in and said, don't respond. So diplomatically, we've created space, and we've managed to persuade many of our key partners that there is space under the nuclear threshold for conventional action of this nature, which, and the Pakistanis, by claiming that there's no such space, are essentially lying. And that was something which was reflected in what the Prime Minister said today as well, when he said that we will not give in to nuclear blackmail, we will push back. He said that in his speech today. Second, coming to your immediate question about what happened diplomatically post May 7th or even before May 7th, especially after May 7th, India was consistent in its diplomatic messaging. And I know there was a lot out there in the media, both domestic and international, but India's diplomatic messaging was consistent. We will not escalate if Pakistan doesn't escalate. Our objective was to target terror camps, which we felt were responsible for infractions against India. We've targeted those camps. We have taken economic measures such as the Indus Waters Treaty being kept in abeyance. As far as we are concerned, those objectives have been met. We are not into mission creep. This is our objectives have been met. If Pakistan takes steps, we'll be forced to take steps. This diplomatic messaging was consistent. Who were its recipients? Obviously, countries that were in touch with both India and Pakistan. And here, I would say the US had a monopoly, say 20 years ago, or in 2001, for instance, or in 2008. It had a near monopoly. Today, the US has to share space with other diplomatic partners that India has built relationships with. I would say primarily the UAE and the Saudis are new partners who were more active this time than they had been previously. All of them played a role. Yes, the President of the United States tweeted the news before anybody else. I guess there is a difference in US diplomatic posture in terms of the say-do ratio than it has been previously. People are quicker to say now. But the fact is, this diplomatic message that India would not escalate if Pakistan did not escalate was delivered to the Americans, was delivered to the Saudis, was delivered to uh, the Emiratis, and anybody who wanted to listen. So the Pakistanis probably heard it from several different sources.
And actually, I mean, just to take that to its conclusion, what do you say led to led to the outcome, the understanding between the DGMOs of the two countries?
If you sort of clarify the fog, the information fog that any such conflict inevitably suffers from, information fog domestically, internationally, exaggeration by state actors, especially in Pakistan, complete exaggeration by media actors, both domestic and international. We've heard all sorts of things. But if you cut through all of the fog, it's fairly clear that India came out better. India targeted almost without a punitive response by the Pakistanis, because every Pakistani response was more or less thwarted. India targeted terror camps. And subsequently, when Pakistan escalated, India also targeted key military installations and air bases. Again, in not one province, but several provinces of Pakistan. And we've known Pakistan have admitted damage to at least one air base. There will probably be more air bases that have been affected. Pakistan's ability to escalate in a conventional war was seriously constrained after this, especially in terms of using its air force. Now, did Pakistan threaten something else? Your guess is as good as mine.
Two more questions for you, and then one last, Aparna, before we turn to Q&A. One is, there's been a fair amount of criticism, both in India, more questions, and outside of India, that while Pakistan and Pakistan's leaders were flooding the airwaves, were just talking to the press, both international, domestic. The Prime Minister spoke many times. In India's case, there was usually a single daily briefing done by the Foreign Secretary and military officers. And then it was only in the last 24 hours we've seen the Indian military do a more thorough briefing. And then, of course, the Prime Minister's speech today. Do you think there was a challenge in communicating India's point of view as the crisis was unfolding? To Ashok.
Well, a couple of things here. One, while the crisis was unfolding, it was frustrating to see the Pakistani point of view get more play on many international channels than the Indian point of view. And certainly, I think there was a dissonance between our diplomatic messaging, which was consistent, and what was being heard domestically and what was being heard on international channels as well. There was a dissonance, and that there is a learning there. Things can always be done better. Having said that, when you're in the midst of such a conflict, you can't go out there and give out details such as were given out after the conflict got over by the Indian military leadership. And I am a little surprised at how credible the credibility with which Pakistani claims were taken by serious international observers, academics, people on social media coming up with all sorts of claims, and serious people, not just random names, or even international channels. So do you expect me to believe that in a 25-minute operation, the Pakistanis shot down 5 jets? That's impossible. But yet you had international television channels and news agencies making that claim. There was this whole story about an Indian plane being shot down, an Indian pilot being captured. There was a lot out there which was crazy. There was also a lot on Indian news channels which was crazy. I mean, one night we were told Karachi had been attacked and all of that. But I don't think the media, whether domestic or international, covered itself with glory at this year.
One final quick question to you. In your current guise as as a consultant, as somebody who works with multinational corporations, what have been questions that, say, for example, investors and businesses that do a lot of business in India and are interested in doing more? What are the kinds of questions or concerns that they've had over the past few days? And will this incident affect other sort of economic ambitions of India?
Uh, the one question we kept getting was, would it be a limited response, or was India looking at something longer term or larger? And once they were told that our understanding was this was going to be a limited operation, people were fine with it. They expected some sort of a response by India, and they were happy, or well, satisfied that it was going to be kept at that and not go into mission creep, because they were looking at something which would meet a certain target, a certain given objective. In this case, it was destroying those camps. Now, in terms of how international businesses look at the Indian business environment in the context of this incident, you know, obviously they expected India to respond, and they want a country that faces a terror attack of this nature, especially in a state that is attracting or looking to attract economic investment in tourism, in hospitality, in other areas. They want the Indian state to stand up for what has happened and to hit back. So they don't want the state that is a pushover. So in that sense, I think India's credibility went up with this attack. And India's sense of responsibility in not expanding this into an unending conflict, but saying we've met our limited objectives, we're moving back. That was also appreciated. Now, will this make a difference to foreign investment numbers or business confidence? I don't think that's really been affected by this. And it still boils down to India's trade agreement with the US, which is being negotiated, and where India's tariffs sit vis-a-vis China's tariffs, and we are nowhere close to a final figure of any of those at the moment. But if you ask me, India has come out looking responsible, both effective and standing up for itself and its people, but also responsible in not going in for an unending conflict. So that would have given international business some sort of satisfaction.
And one question to Aparna before we turn it over to a few questions from the audience. There's in some ways a sort of where do we go from here? I mean, I think nobody quite knows, but just to give some structure to that, we have now an agreement, an understanding, as India calls it. The US and several others have called it something more, a ceasefire, and I mean, more of it India has certainly downplayed, and the Prime Minister reiterated that Operation Sindoor is not over yet. As such. And yet we've seen a few cases since the announcement of that understanding of, for example, drones sighted in Punjab, in Rajasthan, in Srinagar, Pakistani drones. And even today, where do you see this, just in the near term, where do you see this understanding headed?
Thanks, Dhruv. I mean, I think the ceasefire will hold, because if the Indian side sort of, did not want that, then that would have come out very clearly in either the statement made by the armed sort of, by the press conference by the military yesterday, or the Prime Minister today. So yes, there will be some violations. There'll be some shelling on the border. There'll be some, drones, because the sort of ceasefire is not like a tap. We just don't turn it off. Sort of between India and Pakistan, a line of control, there's always something which goes, sort of, they will be back and forth before things calm down. And I would say it'll take some part of this week for things to calm down, unless, something big like a terror attack or something happens, and then all bets may be off once again. But I'd say it'll calm down in a few days, most likely by the end of this week or something like that. Though firing off and on the line of control, may still happen even after that. That doesn't mean that the ceasefire does not hold. I mean, technically, the February 2021, the sixth ceasefire between the two countries, held for 4 years, despite everything that the general talked about. So I think it will hold. I mean, the sort of, what the next steps after this, I think right now, all the Indian side is confirmed is the DGMOs would speak, and maybe they'll have another conversation. Whether that proceeds into national security advisors having a conversation and meeting up, we'll have to wait and see. And whether that then moves into something like a back channel, or a resumption of a back channel once again, as happened during General Muni's predecessor, General Bajwa's time. Whether that happens, again, I don't have a crystal ball, but it will all depend on both sides, whether the the current army chief, that side, is interested in, sort of in a resumption of that kind, then sort of, then the Indian side would do it. Otherwise, they're not going to start something which the Pakistani side has no intention to abide with.
Actually, if I can just quickly follow up on that, you mentioned just at the end the army chief, General Munir. What do you think his role is to play with this? I mean, there's been a lot. We've already discussed his speech that he gave, which many in India thought was very inflammatory. But where do you see the army going under him in the near future?
I'd say, despite what the Indian television media said, there is no coup against General Asim Munir. He's more secure in his position today than he was before April 22nd. He has, for the last 3 years, he was facing personal attacks, and the army's prestige had suffered because of the attacks by former Prime Minister Imran Khan supporters. Most of that that has gone now, at least in the short term. He is seen as somebody who has defended Pakistan, managed to protect Pakistan, and managed to rally the military, but also the broader Pakistani public in favor of the Pakistani military and especially the Pakistani army. And remember, he had pressure from the Baloch insurgency, which continues. Also, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, relations with Afghanistan, the terror attack on the train in Balochistan, Jafar Express. So all of those, he's managed to turn, at least in the short term, turn the narrative around in the military's favor and in his favor.
General, so there's a few questions. I'm going to group them together in the interest of time. There are a few questions on related to India-Pakistan relations going forward, and I want to get your thoughts on that. One was on specifically what do you think is the way forward? What is needed for a resolution to the conflict going forward? And related to that, will India be forced into some kind of dialogue with Pakistan? One of the viewers asks. So.
Thank you for those questions, Dhruva. Well, early to say yet. We have just on the third or the fourth day, the ceasefire. At this stage, obviously, there's a lot of jingoism, both sides of the line of control and the international border. No one is going to give way at this time. Everyone will hold his cards very, very close to the chest at this particular time. We've just come out of a crisis kind of a situation. But a bit of forward-looking as such, I would say the Indian position would be very clear. Our position will continue to remain very steady, that terror and talks cannot be combined. That's the position which Prime Minister Modi has held from day one. In fact, he was reluctant in 2014 when he came to power. It took him a year and a half before he actually broke the ice, although he had broken the ice on the 26th of May 2014 itself by inviting Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif. But he took almost a year and a half before he sent the National Security Advisor for a dialogue, the former Foreign Minister, the late Sushma Swaraj, also for the Heart of Asia conference to Islamabad. He made his efforts. But he was steadfast in his belief that terrorism and talks will not go together. I think the Uri attacks, the Balakot attacks, both of them reinforced the stance. And I think the same is going to happen with the Pahalgam incident and the subsequent events which have happened at this time. There is likely to be no dilution in this. If there's anything by way of moving forward is concerned, I would agree with Dr. Aparna that it is track 2. Track 2 is there. There is a track 2 channel, 2-3 groups which are meeting, sponsored by the United States and Canada, sponsored by Australia, the UK, etc. These are reasonably effective. I've been myself a part of the military-to-military track 2 group, and we have tried to put together some protocols. But each time we have actually succeeded in putting these protocols, something has come to hijack the whole thing away again. So we always start from point 1 all over again. So I'm not sure that anything is going to succeed in the near future. As long as we have a status quo, as long as we don't have terror attacks taking place, as long as infiltration is under control and recruitment is under control, if there are no incidents, I would say for the better part of the next 1 year, 1.5 years or so, that may be the indicator that Pakistan is a little more serious about reaching out. And then perhaps that is the time something could perhaps happen. But till then, the Indian stance is clear. Our stance is Pakistan occupied Kashmir is the only issue which is left to be resolved in favor of India.
There are two or three questions. I'll sort of group them together because they're related for Ashok, which are really about India-US relations. So on the one hand, how much should India take into account that, say, if China stood by Pakistan in this conflict, the US, whereas the US was perceived as having a more even-handed approach to it, is essentially, I think the implication of that question is how much can India rely on the US in the future? There's equally, it seems, a question from the other direction, which is what are the implications of all of this for the US's Indo-Pacific strategy and essentially what does it mean for India as a partner? And finally, on that, there's a sort of a third and related element to it, which is how much is the US sharing space with other partners, as you pointed out diplomatically? How much of that is a result of structural dynamics or the somewhat the specifics of this administration's handling of the situation?
I'll take the third one first because it's the easiest to answer. It's a bit of both. Initially, at least, this administration was not really interested. In fact, Vice President Vance even said it's not our problem. And this conflict, or this issue is not our problem. President Trump came up with a timeline which was strange. It's a 1,500-year-old war. I don't think India and Pakistan have been around for 1,500 years. Okay, but you see, in the past 15 or 20 years, or maybe even the past 10 years, Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which were the two countries who were very closely involved in these conversations, have become much closer to India politically, strategically, economically, and they have a greater stake in India's development and growth, as we do in theirs, as India does in theirs. There's also a greater understanding of India's position, of where India stands, of India's concerns and sensitivities. So some of this is actually structural. We have had a diversification of partnerships. And I dare say, even if the US administration was as laser focused from day one as previous administrations have been in such situations, the UAE and the Saudis, for instance, would still have got involved, would still have been interested. I do remember that Prime Minister Modi was in Saudi Arabia when the Pahalgam attack took place. So there's no way the Saudis could have just ignored it and would have wanted to ignore it. In terms of where does India stand vis-a-vis China and the US, the US's Indo-Pacific strategy, quite honestly, as an Indian, India has to look at its immediate security goals and immediate security concerns. Its neighborhood, both to its east, which is proving to be a bit problematic, and to its west, and of course to its north. These are challenges India will have to face and to find solutions to, irrespective of who stands by India when. And if you have a diversification or diversity of partners, you will always find somebody or the other standing by you at some point. I would say that especially the social media statements coming out of the White House in the past 2 or 3 days, including today, are not helping matters. Because I think the US is signaling it wants to get into mediation without quite understanding what that entails, what that means, or the pushback against it in India. Yet it's continuing to happen. And this, it can be ignored, but at some point it could become a serious public relations issue for both the government of India in India and for the US in India.
General, there are a few questions that have to do a little bit more with operational issues. Essentially, somebody's asked, what are the lessons to be learned for both the Indian and Pakistani armies? We don't have anyone from the Pakistan army here, but if you can perhaps address, are there any lessons learned immediately? And understandably, this is events have only just taken place. And what are some of the lessons learned? And similarly, what does it mean for the Indian military's ongoing reforms, including operational jointness and indigenous defense manufacturing?
Thank you for that. That's and very effective. Those questions are the very relevant ones. Lessons learned at the end of any crisis, any warlike situation, conflict. This is the first thing which always comes up. Obviously, a lot of analysis will be gone into, but off the cuff at the moment, what is evident from the reports which we have been able to glean from media or upfront from whatever we are hearing, the noise which is taking place there, I would say one of the very important things for us in India is the fact that our transformational process undertaken by the military is succeeding. And this is the coming of age of a lot of things in terms of technology, because if you really see the demonstration of technology here, without crossing the border, no single man has crossed the border. We've been able to achieve our objectives. This you couldn't have imagined 10 years ago or 15 years ago at all. That was, at that time, the only response that India knew was to mobilize the army. And you remember 2001, 2002, what happened? We were in a state of mobilization for the better part of 18 months or more. Lost 1,000 men almost in mine lifting operations thereafter. So this has been a huge takeaway from that. The fact that Prime Minister Modi's introduction of Atmanirbharta, self-reliance, has succeeded. I mean, the first signs of the major success are already showing up here. The DRDO, some of its projects, very, very important things, and they seem to be delivering. What is clear about one thing is that our relationship with Russia, in military terms, our relationship with Russia continues to hold good. The S-400 has come into effect it's come to our rescue to a great extent. Lots of refurbishment of different air defense guns was done. The other aspect is the integration of the three services. I mean, you've seen an integrated air defense command, which has virtually taken, the front out here completely. And not a single element from Pakistan could actually penetrate into Indian airspace and not get shot down. Everything was taken down. There were no casualties without that. Of course, there was lots of shelling, etc., which took place on the line of control. That's a different thing completely. We know we've handled that before in the past. We'll continue to handle it in the same way as we have done it in the past. The Indian Air Force has done well, notwithstanding all kinds of reports and rumors about losing aircraft, etc. None of us know anything about that. But the fact that we have been able to do precision bombing of targets inside Punjab without crossing the international border, I think has been a big takeaway from here also. So technology is the major thing for us. And also the fact that Jammu and Kashmir, or the Jammu and Kashmir as such, I'm sure as we go along, we will be able to prove that none of this has affected the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The people of Jammu and Kashmir continue to remain in support of the integrated India, which is something which is very, very evident. You've seen the kind of candlelit marches which have taken place in Srinagar and other cities of Kashmir. None of this could have been possible 10, 12 years ago. So I'll stop at that.
I think a final question, because we're running short of time, which I'll ask all three of you maybe as a sort of wrap up, one from a viewer. In a hyper-connected world, how can governments effectively counter misinformation and manage public perception, especially as intelligence and narrative control increasingly shape the outcomes of global hostilities? Perhaps we can start with you, Ashok, and then Aparna and General Hasnain after that. So Ashok, please.
Look, it is a challenge, and frankly, even with the best of uh, ability and best of efforts, there will still be an information fog in a live conflict situation. Uh, you do remember the early days of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. There was a lot of misinformation from both sides coming out. There was a lot of genuine confusion. So some of this is unavoidable. Uh, in the context of the recent episode, the recent events, talking from as an Indian, I would say that diplomatic messaging and domestic understanding of that nuance were traveling at different speeds, and uh, I don't think that was a conscious decision to mislead domestic public opinion or anything of that sort. I don't think sufficient effort was uh, paid to that simply because people were too busy tackling uh, the larger diplomatic and military concerns. And that is a learning, especially in a hyper-connected world where you know uh, every concerned citizen uh, behind a screen of this nature or with a keyboard in front of him or her uh, is, in a sense, opinion and news shaper and disseminator. I don't know if that answer satisfies you. That's the best I can come up with.
Sort of, I agree with Ashok. I'll just add the three things. One, governments are always limited in what they can and cannot do when we live in a world of, 24/7 television and social media of all kinds. So there will be limitations to what governments can do. Media has sometimes it'll all depend on media outlets, their desire for ratings and rankings and what they will do, as we saw in here. Third, I do think it will get worse as AI and technology grows, because there's a more of a likelihood that there will be more disinformation in coming days, months, and years ahead. Finally, I would say communications are important. There is historically an Indian reluctance to put out information until everything is fact checked, and I understand that. But if you don't put out information and you don't communicate, the other side's narrative then is visible everywhere. So you have to find a way. The Indian government has to find a way to balance the desire for sort of only providing information once everything is fact checked 3 times versus allowing disinformation to run blatant across international media waves and social media. Thanks.
Last word, General Hasnain.
Yeah, just a very brief one. Firstly, I endorse every word which Dr. Aparna Pande has just said. I think very effectively. We are in the period of grey zone warfare. The Chinese concept of grey zone warfare is very much on us, and the whole world is affected by it. Having said that, in India, we need to evolve a communication strategy doctrine, a policy on strategic communication, if I may say, strategic communication. We've got, we are a democracy, a living democracy, a successful democracy. I can't imagine putting a controls on media and that kind of a thing, which many other countries could possibly do. But within the brackets of that freedom, there can be a government policy which sort of tweaks and brings about a sense of responsibility in the media from time to time in national interest. That's how you bring convergence. The convergence is the issue of national interest out here. Otherwise, everyone is a loose missile as far as this kind of a situation is concerned. Everyone's got an opinion. One big takeaway, I would say, for India in the middle of all this has been a slight enhancement in our overall strategic culture. Better understanding. A lot of people are speaking trash on television, there's no doubt about it, but a lot of people are speaking sense at the same time. So there are people taking away a lot of sense, and that's one of the positives of which have emerged from here.
Thank you. With that, it just leaves me to thank our speakers. Thank you, General Hasnain, Dr. Pande, Mr. Malik, for joining us for this hour. I hope all of you found this useful. A reminder that this video is being recorded. We will post it on our YouTube channel at ORF America. Hope those of you who joined, and I think at one point we had about 75 live viewers. Hope many of you can join us for future events, both in person and virtually. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dhruva.
Thank you.
Thank you.